Briarwood was a peaceful community known for neat lawns and quiet evenings, where families strolled safely after dusk. On a cool autumn night, one gentle lamppost illuminated the figure of Walter Kingston, a 90-year-old World War II veteran slowly making his way home. Though age stooped his posture, there was still a spark in his eyes, a reflection of courage formed decades earlier on the battlefield. Walter lived alone in a modest cottage, having outlived most of his loved ones. Each day, he'd shuffle around the block for fresh air, often pausing to reflect on a past that sometimes felt more tangible than the present. But that night, his routine calm was shattered. Turning a dimly lit corner, Walter found himself confronted by a group of stray dogs. There were 4 or 5 of them, coats matted, glowing eyes catching the lamplight. Their low growls and cautious circling told Walter they saw him as an intruder in their territory. Fear unlike any he'd felt in decades surged. He'd known the horrors of war, but here, in his own suburban street, he faced a primal terror, alone, his cane the only defense. As the dogs tightened their circle, Walter's heart pounded with an intensity that took him back to foxholes and gunfire. He braced for the worst. What unfolded in the next moments would alter not only Walter's life, but eventually the entire town's approach to stray animals. An unexpected rescue, a stirring display of empathy, and the resilience of a man who had once fought on foreign shores would reshape how Briarwood viewed these desperate creatures. In the process, the bond between an aging veteran and a group of forsaken dogs would melt fear into compassion, bringing tears to Walter's eyes and igniting a citywide transformation. This is the hour-long emotional saga of how an innocent evening walk became an unlikely alliance, bridging the cautionary snarls of neglected animals and the lonely footsteps of a 90-year-old war hero. Prepare to immerse yourself in a narrative that explores fear, forgiveness, and the profound connections that form when we choose hope over harm, even in the face of the toughest odds. Walter Kingston lived by careful habits. Every morning, he rose at dawn to brew strong coffee, flipping through a tattered album of black and white war photos. His uniform, now a relic of youth, hung near dusty medals on the wall. Neighbors saw him as a gentle recluse who once braved the deadliest battles. They admired him from a distance, respecting his privacy and occasional solitary strolls. The town of Briarwood, known for its tidy streets, had lately noticed a growing population of stray dogs. Some said foreclosures led owners to abandon pets. Others blamed lack of spay-neuter services. As the strays formed packs, rumors cropped up about nighttime barking and possible threats. Most residents paid little heed until they heard about Walter's harrowing confrontation. On that fateful evening, well past sunset, Walter decided to extend his usual walk. Nostalgia for old times, or maybe the crisp air, lured him down a street he rarely traversed. He was no stranger to fear, but stepping onto that poorly lit block, the sight of multiple canine silhouettes emerged from behind trash cans, bristling with tension. They locked eyes with Walter, curling lips in low growls that made him freeze. Walter's mind raced, fight or flight. A 90-year-old with a cane had little chance outrunning them, and the cane was no match for a full pack. He recalled training from decades ago. Keep calm, avoid startling them. Slowly, he tried to back away, but the largest dog lunged forward a step, forcing him to halt. His pulse hammered. Memories of artillery shells threatened to drown him, but he forced them back. This is home, not war, yet it feels so similar, he thought. Just then, out of the darkness, appeared a young woman named Rosa. Carrying a small bag of treats, she'd come to feed the strays she'd been trying to help for weeks. At her soothing voice, the dog's aggression wavered. They recognized her scent, hesitating between suspicion and the memory of food. Rosa inched closer, calling out to Walter to remain still. Her presence quelled the pack's tension. Within minutes, she coaxed them aside, offering morsels. The dogs relaxed enough for Walter to edge away, tears of relief streaming down his weathered cheeks. Rosa introduced herself, guiding him to safety. He stammered gratitude, but his shock hindered explanation. She explained she was feeding these dogs regularly, building trust to eventually rehome or rehabilitate them. That night, they were unsettled by a stranger, Walter, forging an unintended threat. She apologized on their behalf, which baffled him further. "Why apologize for them?" he asked, voice trembling. "They nearly tore me apart." Rosa saw terror behind his gaze, empathizing but unwavering in her conviction that these dogs weren't inherently evil, just frightened and neglected. Escorting Walter home, she noted his trembling. "I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right," she said softly. He managed a nod, still in partial disbelief. Once indoors, he locked his door, sinking against it. The memory of how close he came to harm, coupled with the unexpected kindness from both Rosa and the dogs, who, in the end, held back from attacking, kept replaying in his mind. By morning, Walter awoke unrested. Something about the incident gnawed at him beyond mere fear. He recognized that confusion of not knowing how to feel. In war, enemies were clear. But here, these dogs seemed monstrous in that moment, yet turned docile once Rosa intervened. He'd never encountered hostility that quickly turned to calm, purely because someone showed empathy. The moral lines blurred. A part of him felt anger. Couldn't they see I meant no harm? Another part, fueled by the memory of war horrors, understood that in chaos, beings lash out from desperation. Rosa's promise to visit that day was a glimmer of solace. He wanted to ask questions. Who was she, risking herself nightly to feed these strays? How could she stand in the center of a snarling circle and come out unscathed? Most importantly, should he now fear venturing out after dark, or could he somehow reclaim his sense of safety? That evening, Rosa indeed arrived at his cottage. She brought him homemade cookies and explained more about the dog's plight. Many had once been pets, abandoned when families moved away or couldn't afford care. They banded together in loose packs, surviving on scraps. Skittish and defensive, they barked or snarled at unfamiliar faces, especially if threatened or cornered. Walter listened intently, guilt mingling with relief. They, too, are victims, he realized. Rosa proposed a radical notion. Perhaps Walter, a respected veteran in Briarwood, could help shift public perception about these animals, urge the city council to try humane solutions instead of culling them. Walter balked, uncertain. At 90, he rarely engaged in local politics, but her earnestness struck him. If not for Rosa, he might have been mauled. If not for her dedicated feedings, the dogs might have turned truly vicious. The line between cruelty and redemption, it seemed, was heartbreakingly thin. As Rosa left, Walter stared at a small dog treat she'd gifted him. "Maybe it'll help you feel less afraid next time." He sighed, recalling the war, where he once believed all enemies were savage, only to learn compassion from local villagers who saved them. Could the same logic apply to stray dogs? That night he decided he owed it to himself, and maybe those dogs, to find out. Fear still gripped him, but a stirring of empathy blossomed. Quietly he realized, I've faced bullets. I won't let a few growls keep me from doing what's right. A new chapter in his life began, bridging war-born bravery with a mission to protect living souls many had written off as lost. Walter's newfound resolve to help, at least in some small way, guided him to make a first step. He asked Rosa for a list of tasks the rescue effort needed. The next morning, he phoned 2 neighbors, politely inquiring if they'd be open to fostering a stray dog, carefully chosen for docility. One neighbor was indifferent, the other intrigued but cautious. "I used to have a beagle," she reminisced. "Maybe I can handle a quiet one." Every small yes was a victory. In parallel, Rosa expanded her daily feedings, meticulously mapping each group of stray dogs across town. She discovered more pockets than she realized, near abandoned lots, behind restaurants. The magnitude of the problem threatened to exceed her capacity, yet she refused to turn away. Walter suggested the city council needed to be confronted with the truth. There are too many dogs for a single volunteer to manage. We need real city support. She wholeheartedly agreed, but City Hall had shown little interest. So she encouraged Walter to speak at the next monthly council session. He was hesitant, fearing public speaking. Yet, he recalled the sense of duty from his army days, stepping forward despite discomfort. People in Briarwood respected him, so perhaps his words would carry weight. Affirming this, Rosa promised to stand by him. They prepared a concise statement, highlighting the cruelty of lethal measures and the feasibility of rescue and rehoming if the city offered minimal funding. The same approach had succeeded in other places. Walter practiced reading it in front of a mirror, but each time he stumbled, feeling odd about activism at his age. Yet Rosa's unwavering faith emboldened him. He reminded himself of how close he'd been to harm. Fleeing from the problem wouldn't solve it. On the evening of the council session, a moderate crowd assembled in the small city hall. Most were there for routine municipal matters, but the stray dog item drew a share of interest. Council members looked weary, a typical sign of budgets under strain. Miss Alvarez, known for progressive views, greeted Walter kindly, whispering she was eager to hear from him. Fitzpatrick, a more conservative councilman, eyed him neutrally, not expecting much from an old war vet's plea about dogs. When the floor opened for public comments on the agenda, Rosa first recounted her experiences feeding the dogs. She described how a gentle approach had tamed many once skittish canines. Some in the audience rolled eyes, others listened with polite curiosity. Council members, unconvinced, asked how she'd manage the rest if more strays kept emerging. Her best answer was, "If we get minimal city support, we can scale. Volunteers alone can't do it all." She stepped back, nerves fluttering. Then the mayor introduced Walter. The hush that fell was noticeable. Everyone respected the stooped figure hobbling forward on his cane, medals from yesteryears pinned on an old blazer. He began softly, recounting in halting words how those dogs cornered him late one night. People gasped, leaning closer. Then he spoke of how a single person's empathy prevented tragedy. A hush overcame the room as he expressed how easily fear can drive us to violence. "I fought a war, saw enemies turned into friends once we understood them. Are we so quick to kill these animals simply because they're homeless?" A scattered applause rose. Miss Alvarez nodded encouragingly. Fitzpatrick interrupted with a question about public safety. Walter acknowledged the fear, but insisted that humane rescue and spay-neuter can reduce stray aggression better than culling. He invoked the moral stance that a community's greatness is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable. Many nodded, moved by his sincerity. For a man who rarely spoke in public, Walter's voice soared with a quiet authority. Despite the applause, the council's official stance was non-committal. The mayor thanked Walter but cited budget constraints. Fitzpatrick argued the city was not a charity for animals, drawing some agreement from cost-minded attendees. Miss Alvarez requested a formal discussion for a rescue pilot. The council tabled it, promising to revisit soon. Walter left feeling both relieved he'd tried and disappointed that no immediate decision emerged. That evening, outside City Hall, a few neighbors approached Walter. Some were parents worried about dog bites. Others were folks curious about volunteering. Engaging with them, Walter realized bridging empathy wouldn't be easy. Yet each conversation chipped away at ignorance. At home, he told Rosa that a door had cracked open, but they needed a bigger push. In the following days, local journalists who heard about the stray dog war hero wrote short pieces or posted stories on social media. Readers found the narrative gripping. A 90-year-old once threatened by dogs, now championing their rescue. Curiosity soared. Some philanthropic locals offered small donations if the city launched an official pilot. Ms. Alvarez latched onto that momentum, drafting a proposal for a limited city-subsidized rescue project, relying heavily on volunteer staffing. Rosa ramped up her daily feeding routes. She noted which dogs displayed possible rehome traits, friendly, used to people, and which ones needed specialized training. Meanwhile, Walter visited a local high school's community service club, encouraging students to pitch in with dog socialization. A surprising number showed interest, inspired by Walter's gentle presence. "If he can do it at 90, what's our excuse?" some teens quipped, forging an unexpected volunteer pool. Still, negativity persisted among others. The next council session loomed, rumored to feature a draft resolution about the pilot program. Critics planned to argue the city shouldn't fund soft solutions. Some neighbors wanted a faster fix, capture or kill. The tension mounted once more. On a calm afternoon, Walter sat in his humble study, remembering years past. Memories of war's brutality contrasted with the new battle, which was far smaller in scale but just as emotionally gripping. He recognized that war taught him empathy for the misunderstood, be they foreign civilians or now armed stray animals. The parallels stirred him. War taught him. Fear leads to hatred, but empathy can save lives. That lesson propelled him to keep forging alliances no matter how old he was. Armed with that conviction, he prepared for the next big council debate, uncertain if City Hall would embrace or reject the pilot plan. Either way, he vowed not to let the dogs down. He suspected this fight, though overshadowed by local politics, was as crucial in principle as any broader moral stand he'd taken in life. If he and Rosa could align enough hearts, fear might again be conquered by compassion. The stage was set for a pivotal clash at the next council meeting, forging the crucial next step in the story, either a triumphant or tragic turning point for the strays of Briarwood. Weeks passed, and rumors of an official city council vote on a stray dog pilot program circulated. The local paper, the Briarwood Gazette, ran a front-page snippet, "Council to consider, humane stray solution, proposal led by war heroes plea." Some read it with excitement, others with skepticism, expecting heated debate. Meanwhile, in the day-to-day, more sightings of strays popped up around construction sites and behind the local supermarket, intensifying the sense of urgency. Rosa continued her daily feeding routine with unwavering dedication, often accompanied now by rotating volunteers. Some were teenage students, others elderly folks inspired by Walter's stance. On these rounds, they documented each dog's appearance and behavior, using phone cameras and notes. Her few dogs, pregnant or recently with pups, needed special care. This approach underlined how pressing the situation was. Without spay, neuter, the stray population could balloon further. One morning, Rosa discovered a litter of 4 puppies curled up near a trash bin. She carefully moved them into a sturdy box, ensuring the mother was close behind. Another volunteer, Heidi, tearfully realized that had they not come that day, the puppies might not survive. Each new discovery fueled their commitment, while reminding them how big the challenge remained. Walter, though physically limited, grew into the group's unofficial spokesperson. He penned a heartfelt letter to the editor of the Briarwood Gazette, describing the day he almost got attacked and how one person's compassion saved both him and the dogs. His letter ended with a call to answer fear with understanding. The newspaper published it. The public response was mostly positive. People recognized the raw sincerity of a man who had lived through so much, only to champion stray animals in his final years. Encouraged, Walter made phone calls to any local influencer he could recall, church leaders, business owners, even the local radio station. He rarely asked for personal favors, but he asked them to consider endorsing a humane approach to strays. The radio host, intrigued by the unusual story, invited him for a short interview. On air, Walter recounted the transformation in his own perspective. He stressed the moral question: does a civilized town handle a problem by killing or by guiding lost creatures to safety? Calls flooded in after his brief segment. Not everyone cheered. Fitzpatrick, the Conservative councilman, continued labeling the proposal idealistic. He pointed to old incidents of dog bites, stoking fear that a volunteer-based program might not be robust enough to protect children. Another group of locals formed a Protect Our Neighborhood petition, demanding immediate, lethal measures for stray dogs. Their flyers insisted that compassion can't overshadow public safety, accompanied by images of snarling canines. Tensions simmered in the city's daily chatter, with some neighbors nearly at each other's throats over the question of how to address the strays. Meanwhile, among the dogs that Rosa regularly encountered was the large, scarred one that had nearly lunged at Walter. She had come to call him Sergeant in a nod to Walter's military background. That dog remained wary of strangers, refusing to let volunteers get too close. Yet Sergeant recognized Rosa by scent, allowing her within a safe distance, especially when she brought scraps of fresh meat. She assured Walter that the day Sergeant was captured for vet care would come, gently if possible. The idea of meeting that dog again unsettled Walter, but also intrigued him. He wrestled with conflicting desires. Part of him wanted to see the dog redeemed. part of him feared a reminder of that terrifying night. On a brighter note, fosters soared in number. People who never considered adopting realized they could do short-term fostering, bridging the gap until a permanent home was found. Once fearful neighbors discovered that the calmer strays could be quite affectionate and easily trained. Social media pages filled with success stories. Meet Buddy, once a stray behind the train station, now the sweetest companion. The wave of positivity chipped away at negativity, building a slow but steady shift in public perception. As the city council meeting day approached, Ms. Alvarez finalized the pilot proposal. It asked for minimal city funding, mostly for vet bills, a small holding facility, and equipment to safely capture dogs. Volunteers would handle daily feeding and fostering. The key was a structured approach that outlasted single-person efforts. The pilot plan spanned 6 months, after which, if data proved successful, the program could become permanent. People pinned hopes on this motion. Walter steeled himself to speak at that meeting, guided by Rosa's unwavering support. He scribbled notes, drafting a short speech. He tried to keep it balanced, acknowledging valid concerns about public safety while passionately championing humane solutions. Rosa also prepared to address logistical details, unveiling a chart of how many dogs might be spayed or adopted monthly, given resources. But behind the scenes, Fitzpatrick and his supporters readied a counterpush, calling for forcibly removing or euthanizing the dogs. They claimed that taxpayer money shouldn't be wasted on strays, that volunteer-led rescue was naive. They circulated stories of near attacks, some real, some exaggerated, to maintain fear. By the time meeting day dawned, the stage was set for a dramatic showdown. Would Walter's heartfelt plea and Rosa's practical plan sway the council? Or would fear-laced arguments from the opposition carry the day? Walter replayed that question in his mind repeatedly. He recognized echoes of his war experiences, 2 sides at a crossroads, each believing it's right. But the difference now was there were no lethal enemies, only frightened animals and frightened people. The question was whether empathy could break the cycle of aggression and quell alarm. With the meeting only hours away, Walter donned his old service jacket, pinned on 2 modest medals, and resolved that if a final stand was needed for these dogs, he would give it wholeheartedly. On that day, the city of Briarwood would have to choose between compassion or destruction. On the evening of the scheduled city council session, a throng of Briarwood residents packed into the modest assembly hall. Extra folding chairs lined the back wall, but still many stood, fanning themselves against the closeness of the crowd. The tension was palpable. Some arrived wearing t-shirts or pins that said, "Yes to compassion," or "Stop strays now." Behind the scenes, Rosa paced with her notes. Her plan was to reiterate that a volunteer rescue pilot, coordinated with city funds, wasn't just moral, but practical. She had data. Cost estimates showing spay, neuter, and adoption was cheaper long-term than indefinite canine extermination or ignoring the problem until it escalated. But she also knew fear was a potent persuader. Stories of dog bites or yard damage from strays might overshadow her facts. Walter, stoic in a corner, also prepared quietly. He'd come to accept that his emotional testimony might matter more than any statistic. After all, he once nearly fell victim to these stray dogs. If he could champion them, perhaps that carried weight. He laid a comforting hand on Rosa's shoulder, murmuring, "We'll do our best." At 7 p.m., sharp, the mayor, Ms. Alvarez, Councilman Fitzpatrick, and others took their seats. The mayor opened with a reminder, "We discussed the proposed stray rescue pilot. Let's remain civil." The crowd hushed, anticipating a clash of viewpoints. Fitzpatrick swiftly stepped up to present the problems. He recounted a neighbor's fence torn by strays rummaging for food, an alleged dog chase that spooked a child near a playground. "It's an epidemic," he insisted. "Relying on volunteers is naive. We have a duty to protect families. Our city can't be a halfway house for feral animals." Applause mingled with boos. Mrs. Alvarez signaled calm. Next, and when Rosa rose with a chart detailing volunteer feedings reducing wandering plans for spay, neuter, to break breeding cycles. Early fosters showing success stories, minimal budget needed, partially offset by donations. She argued that fear-based culling was inhumane and short-sighted, leaving the population likely to rebound from adjacent areas. "We want a pilot so we can systematically reduce the stray population through adoption and sterilization, not by lethal force," she concluded. A portion of the crowd clapped vigorously, though some critics remained unmoved, arms folded. At the mayor's invitation, Walter approached. The audience hushed, remembering the prior time he spoke. He recounted his near attack, how Rosa's intervention changed everything, and how he recognized the dogs were themselves victims of abandonment. "I was petrified that night," he admitted, voice trembling. "But I also learned these dogs are not savage by choice. They're hungry, confused, left to survive. As a man who's seen war's desperation, I refuse to watch creatures be destroyed when we have a better path." A hush prevailed. Even some who supported culling paused, touched by the man's raw sincerity. He ended with, "I can't fight battles like I used to, but I'll fight for this. Let's choose compassion that fosters safety, not fear that fosters cruelty." Ms. Alvarez then proposed a formal motion, a 6-month pilot rescue program, partially city-funded, heavily volunteer-run, with monthly progress reports. If successful, the city might adopt it permanently. She hammered home that the cost would be modest, the main expense covering spay-neuter, temporary kennel facilities, and a small part-time manager to coordinate. Applause from the volunteer group soared. Fitzpatrick, scowling, demanded to know what happened if the pilot failed. Would the city revert to lethal methods? Miss Alvarez admitted it might, if no improvement occurred. People gulped, acknowledging that outcome was still possible, but she insisted it was better to try than default to killing. The mayor, leaning neutral, called for final public comments. One by one, residents stepped forward with anecdotes: a child who overcame fear by petting a once-stray puppy, a senior who found companionship, a local teacher who watched dog-related conflict transform into community service among students. The synergy of these heartfelt stories overshadowed Fitzpatrick's dire warnings, at least for the moment. But then a mother tearfully recounted how a stray once cornered her daughter in a park, leaving the child traumatized. She urged caution. The tension soared. Could safety and compassion align? Miss Alvarez assured her the pilot included immediate capture of known hotspot dogs for training or rehab, thus mitigating attacks. The mother, albeit skeptical, looked slightly comforted. In the hush that followed, the mayor said, "We have 2 proposals. Adopt the pilot or forcibly remove strays. We'll vote." Fitzpatrick's supporters stiffened. Miss Alvarez's fans, plus volunteers, braced themselves. One by one, the 5 council votes came. Miss Alvarez, yes to the pilot. A second member, usually swayed by cost concerns, also said yes, thanks to positive testimonies. Fitzpatrick growled no, scolding them for ignoring public safety threats. The 4th member, the mayor, paused, then declared yes, leaning on the community's strong push for humane methods. The 5th, her eyes scanning the room, whispered no, citing risk concerns. The final was 3-2 in favor. Applause erupted from volunteers who leapt to their feet. Walter exhaled a trembling sigh, tears brimming. Rosa clasped his hand, joyful. The mayor hammered the gavel for order, declaring the pilot official for 6 months. As the assembly dispersed, a swirl of relieved chatter filled the hall. Some residents congratulated Walter, others left in frustration, calling it a bleeding heart fiasco. Rosa's group, delighted, planned the next steps: a more stable feeding routine, quick spay, neuter, and fostering expansions. Ms. Alvarez promised to help secure the needed funds. Meanwhile, Walter lingered near the dais, absorbing it all. A single tear traced down his cheek, recalling how just weeks ago he was petrified by snarling dogs. Now he felt hope. In forging compassion for abandoned animals, he'd also found renewed purpose. With the pilot secured, the real work would begin. But at least for these strays, there was a glimmer of a future free from bullets or lethal syringes. The city had chosen empathy over fear, an outcome that brought tears to an old soldier's eyes, reminded once again that no battle is truly lost if hearts can still change. With the pilot program approved, Briarwood's rescue initiative began moving from theory to action. The city allocated a modest budget, letting Rosa's volunteer group collaborate with local vets for spay, neuter, and basic medical checks. They converted a disused maintenance shed near the community center into a temporary shelter. Though humble, it had enough space for several kennels, plus a small fenced yard for exercise. Volunteers started scheduling shifts for feeding, cleaning, and basic dog socialization. Walter Rhee, even at 90, was determined to help more than just stand as a figurehead. Though he couldn't physically handle dogs, he made phone calls to philanthropic contacts, reminding them of how a small donation could literally save lives. Some old friends from his war days sent checks with touching notes. "If you believe in these dogs, so do I." A sense of solidarity blossomed. He also sat in on volunteer training sessions, quietly encouraging the younger members. They found it awe-inspiring to see a war veteran taking part in menial tasks like sorting donated dog blankets. But Walter also faced health limitations. His knees ached after standing too long, and doctor visits confirmed that while stable, his advanced age demanded caution. Rosa worried about his stamina, but he insisted that any day spent helping a stray felt worth it. Each new dog saved reinforced his conviction that small acts of kindness ripple far, a principle he'd glimpsed long ago during the war. Within the first week, the volunteers gently captured around 15 strays from well-known hotspots, behind certain dumpsters, near abandoned lots. Some dogs offered no resistance once coaxed with food. Others retreated anxiously, needing humane traps. Rosa carefully recorded each dog's appearance, giving them temporary names and assigning them to separate kennels at the newly set-up facility. There, local vets, participating at discounted rates, administered vaccines and spay, neuter. Over time, the dogs were observed to gauge aggression or adoptability. The day the first group arrived, Walter insisted on coming to see them. Rows of cages with nervous dogs greeted him. The smaller ones cowered in corners, the bigger ones paced. Volunteers circulated, offering calm reassurance. Despite the dogs' initial wariness, the environment felt purposeful, not bleak. Posters of potential fosters or adopters lined a bulletin board. This wasn't some holding cell for euthanasia. This was a waiting room for new beginnings. Yet the pilot faced complexities. Some dogs, previously abused, showed deep fear or occasional outbursts. Crates occasionally shook with panicked barking. Volunteers realized they needed more training for the most traumatized canines. Funding remained tight, and supplies sometimes ran low. The entire project hinged on intangible volunteer dedication, reliant on good faith donations. If any dog seriously harmed a volunteer, or if a big group of new strays swelled their numbers, capacity would be strained. Local critics hovered, ready to pounce on any sign of failure. A rumor circulated about a potential dog bite at the shelter, though it turned out false. Fitzpatrick occasionally dropped by unannounced, scanning the conditions. He acknowledged small improvements, but maintained skepticism. One incident, and the city might change its mind, he warned. Undeterred, Rosa strove to minimize accidents. On a brighter note, adoptive fosters started materializing. Families who once feared strays discovered that with a bit of patience, the gentler dogs could become wonderful companions. A single mother named Alicia adopted a timid brown pup, naming it Clover. 3 weeks later, she returned to the shelter beaming, describing how Clover slept curled beside her daughter's bed. Another older gentleman in a wheelchair found a calm stray that trotted softly behind him, giving him emotional comfort. Each successful adoption spread a positive ripple, forging trust in the pilot. Amid progress, Walter faced a personal hurdle. One day, while walking to the shelter with Rosa, he collapsed from exhaustion. Alarmed volunteers rushed to help him. At the clinic, doctors insisted he reduce physical strain. This gave him pause. Had he overexerted himself? Yet the idea of stepping back left him uneasy, as if the entire rescue mission was now entwined with his sense of meaning. Rosa gently reminded him that rest was also part of sustaining the fight. She promised the pilot wouldn't unravel without his daily presence. "We need you well," she said. "You're our guiding light, not just a worker." Reflecting from a hospital bed for a day, Walter realized that the sense of mission rejuvenated him, but caution was essential. He agreed to cut back on physical tasks, focusing on fundraising and moral support. In the weeks that followed, he operated from his home or the shelter's office area, telephoning fosters, responding to mail, and occasionally recording short radio segments that updated the town on the pilot's progress. His gentle, reassuring voice was widely admired. Buoyed by success stories, local media showcased the pilot as a model for humane stray control. Old tensions gradually eased, though Fitzpatrick kept a watchful eye for any major fiasco. Rosa's group discovered unexpected volunteers from the high school's animal club who diligently helped with cleaning kennels, grooming calmer dogs, or designing adoption flyers. The synergy of young and old replaced the bleak sense of fear. The dogs, once menacing silhouettes at night, were turning into hopeful creatures seeking a second chance. Among these transformations, Walter found himself steadily thinking about the largest dog from that fateful night, still unaccounted for. Rosa sometimes glimpsed it near the train tracks, but hadn't managed to capture it yet. Though she fed it daily, it remained elusive, scarred by possible past abuse. Walter wondered if reuniting with that dog might close the circle of fear and redemption. He brushed off the shiver that thought triggered, believing it necessary for full closure. Thus the pilot advanced, half success story, half precarious balancing act. More dogs needed capturing, more fosters were sought, and the biggest dog remained at large. In the tension between unstoppable compassion and lingering fear, the seeds of a deeper confrontation took root. The question lingered. If they managed to bring in that formidable dog once so threatening to Walter, could they truly demonstrate that any dog, no matter how haunted by the streets, could heal? The promise of that rescue kept hearts aflame and set the stage for a dramatic turn that might test both the pilot's resilience and Walter's unwavering dedication. Briarwood's rescue pilot project rolled along, with volunteers tackling stray clusters across various corners of the city. The public mostly admired the progress. Even some who had opposed the plan conceded it showed promise. Yet a glaring reminder of incomplete success loomed. That largest dog, dubbed Sergeant by Rosa, remained uncaptured. Walter followed each day's updates about Sergeant's whereabouts with anxious curiosity. The more good news he heard about other strays, the more he yearned to see the one that started it all find salvation. Rosa consistently placed food for Sergeant near the railroad yard where it roamed. A couple of times, she spotted it from afar, muzzle scarred, eyes scanning for threats. She sensed the dog had endured harsh treatment, maybe beaten or shot at, and thus it maintained fierce distrust, except for the minimal comfort gleaned from her feedings. On nights she was late, it ventured closer to residential areas, prompting complaints from spooked neighbors who glimpsed its imposing silhouette. Some reported low growls or barking near backyard fences. Despite efforts, each time volunteers attempted a humane trap or approached with crates, Sergeant vanished swiftly. It seemed to sense any trick. This inability to catch it gave ammunition to critics who labeled the pilot too soft. Fitzpatrick publicly commented, "If they can't corral the alpha dog, we can never declare the streets safe." Pressure mounted, making Sergeant a symbol of the pilot's perceived shortfall. City Hall scheduled a mid-pilot update to gauge whether the program was on track. Ms. Alvarez indicated the last meeting's consensus held firm for now, but if the big dog situation grew worse, they risked negative blowback. Rosa, though not wanting to kill Sergeant, recognized the city's official stance. Any dog that repeatedly defied rescue attempts and alarmed residents might lead to forced removal, possibly lethal, if no better solution emerged. She confided to Walter that the next few weeks were critical. They had to show progress or the city might reverse course. Walter, hearing Rosa's concerns, felt an urgency to do something. He arranged to accompany her on a feeding night, hoping his presence, ironically, might calm the dog. "I want to face that creature again," he told Rosa, trembling slightly at the memory. He reasoned if Sergeant recognized him, maybe their previous confrontation, where neither truly harmed the other, could serve as a starting point for trust. Rosa hesitated, worried for Walter's safety, but the old man insisted. If she was there to manage the dog's reaction, He believed it might be safe enough. Late one evening, under a waning moon, Walter carefully followed Rosa to the railway yard. They carried a bag of cooked scraps. The environment felt eerie. Rusted tracks, graffiti-laden walls, and the hush of night. "Sergeant usually appears near that cargo container," Rosa whispered. They left some morsels near a half-collapsed fence, stepping back to wait. Walter's heart hammered in his chest, remembering the snarls from that first encounter. He clutched his cane, reminding himself that this time he wasn't alone or defenseless. Minutes passed, until the shape of a dog emerged, broad-shouldered, limping slightly. "Sergeant." He sniffed the ground, recognized Rosa's scent, advanced. She quietly motioned Walter to remain calm. Slowly, Sergeant nibbled the scraps, remaining watchful. Then Walter took a small piece from Rosa's bag, holding it out. Sergeant froze, ears pricked, eyes locked on the old man. The dog's posture tensed, recalling the memory of that nearly violent night. For an instant, Walter feared a repeat scenario, yet he inhaled, voice quivering, "Easy, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." Rosa knelt behind him, softly encouraging Sergeant with a familiar hush. For a heartbeat, the scene hung in precarious balance. Then, to Walter's profound relief, Sergeant advanced a step, sniffing. No growl, but uncertainty. The dog's muzzle inched toward Walter's outstretched hand. A second later, it seized the morsel of food, gently, not lunging. Walter exhaled in trembling relief. The exchange was fleeting. After devouring the piece, Sergeant retreated a few steps, ears still alert, but it hadn't bared teeth or threatened. Walter's eyes misted with tears. A sense of reconciliation overcame him. The dog that once circled him in menacing fury now accepted a morsel from the same trembling hand. Rosa, smiling, whispered, "That's progress. We can build on that." They carefully left more food, retreated quietly so as not to spook Sergeant. On the ride home, Walter's nerves slowly unwound. He found himself softly crying, grappling with the swirl of relief, guilt, and hope. "He's not a monster," he murmured. "Just as I suspected, fear made us both enemies." Rosa relayed the partial breakthrough to Mrs. Alvarez, who was thrilled. She noted that if they could capture Sergeant soon, it would demonstrate the pilot's full capacity, even for the toughest cases. A renewed wave of positivity coursed through volunteers. They shared the anecdote on social media, lauding how the very man who almost fell victim was bridging the gap. Residents who once insisted the alpha dog must be destroyed softened, hearing that it responded to patience. Still, a permanent solution demanded repeated interactions. The plan: keep feeding Sergeant, build trust, eventually coax it or trap it into the shelter for medical care. Walter agreed to keep accompanying Rosa, albeit carefully. The old soldier felt revitalized by each small success. "Even if it's just a step at a time, I owe it to him." The quiet nights by the rail yard thus became a ritual of sorts, forging an unlikely bond that inched Sergeant closer to rescue. Behind the heartwarming steps, challenges remained. The pilot's budget was finite, and the city might question an extension if not all strays were reined in soon. Some bigger packs roamed further out, requiring more volunteer manpower. And while the positivity around Sergeant soared, a single negative incident could still unravel public support. Walter, aware that heartbreak could lurk around the corner, pressed on, hoping that the city's official review in a few weeks would see enough momentum to justify continued backing. In the hush of another starlit night, as Walter parted from Rosa after feeding Sergeant, he felt a sense of profound purpose, like the camaraderie he once felt among soldiers. Humans and animals, side by side, forging alliances in a war not of bullets but of fear and compassion. If the old soldier's life had taught him anything, it was that unwavering resolve, combined with empathy, could turn the tide of even the darkest conflicts. And that belief fueled him forward, step by step, with a single battered dog at the center of this healing transformation. As weeks passed, the rescue pilot advanced steadily, rehoming more dogs and spaying or neutering many others. The city council monitored monthly progress, slightly impressed by how low the costs remained due to volunteer labor and donations. The community's fear gradually ebbed, replaced by mild curiosity or cautious support. However, Sergeant, the large ounce-scarred dog that initially threatened Walter, remained untrapped, though monthly attempts continued with slow improvement in trust. Walter and Rosa maintained regular evening visits to feed Sergeant, carefully building on the dog's acceptance of them. Each time they'd inch closer, speaking gently, Sergeant would approach, take food, then retreat. Gradually, he allowed Rosa to brush lightly against his shoulder for a moment. A hush of wonder overcame them, seeing that fierce dog begin to crave a gentle touch rather than recoil. Walter often felt tears welling in his eyes at each small sign of progress, remembering how once that dog's growls struck him with terror. Still, capturing Sergeant for medical assessment was tricky. He recognized traps, avoiding them. The volunteer trainer suggested an approach. Let Sergeant be comfortable enough to walk on a leash eventually. But that required daily incremental steps. Time was short. The pilot's official review date loomed. If they couldn't demonstrate that even the toughest stray could be rehabilitated, naysayers might demand lethal solutions for dogs deemed unmanageable. Midway through the pilot, Fitzpatrick and a few critics claimed the city needed tangible metrics. They pressed Ms. Alvarez to produce data on how many stray dogs still roamed free, how many new sightings occurred, and how many fosters had fallen through. The city's finance committee also wanted to see if the expense outstripped initial projections. Ms. Alvarez argued that so far the finances were well within budget, but another unforeseen cost, like a large-scale medical crisis, could spark problems. Walter stepped in to help the data collation. He meticulously tallied fosters, adoptions, spayings, and volunteer hours from all logs. Though not a tech-savvy man, his old soldier's discipline proved surprisingly adept at meticulous record-keeping. Working from his small desk, he penned neat columns and sums. By cross-checking with Rosa, he formed a thorough report. Ms. Alvarez, grateful, said it was essential to keep council faith in the pilot. The old war hero's diligence saved them from accusations of sloppy management. Despite the pilot's relative success, a single dog chase incident near the outskirts reignited pockets of fear. A group of rowdy teenage boys had startled a smaller pack, leading to barking and a short chase. Although no one got bitten, sensational talk spread again. Fitzpatrick demanded, "Time is up on half measures," urging the city to hire a private company to forcibly remove problematic strays. The volunteer group quickly intervened, capturing those particular dogs and discovering they were newly arrived from a neighboring town. This turnover of stray migrations indicated a bigger regional issue. Ms. Alvarez's push to collaborate with next-door municipalities was met with slow bureaucracy, leaving a sense that even a successful pilot in Briarwood might not solve the entire region's crisis. Another challenge was volunteer burnout. Handling daily feedings, fosters, and occasional rescues were on the small group. Rosa tried rotating schedules, but some participants dropped out due to time constraints or frustration with the slow progress of rehabilitating traumatized dogs. Animal behaviors occasionally triggered heartbreak or fear in volunteers unaccustomed to intense aggression. The path of compassion wasn't as easy as many assumed. While success stories abounded, behind the scenes was an exhausting labor of love. Rosa herself sometimes woke feeling drained, though she kept a brave face for everyone else's morale. Walter recognized the signs of volunteer fatigue and helped by rallying reinforcements from church groups or the local high school's animal care club. Each new volunteer orientation found him or Rosa explaining the vision, that any living soul deserves a chance, and though challenging, these dogs aren't beyond saving. Often, they cited Sergeant's ongoing improvement as proof. The story of how it once cornered Walter and now gently accepted treats was retold, stirring renewed excitement to see the day Sergeant would finally come in. One quiet evening, Mr. Townsend, who once railed against the pilot, approached the shelter with an offer. "My grandchildren convinced me these dogs can be helped. I want to donate leftover fencing material to expand the kennel yard." This gesture stunned Rosa. Townsend confessed that hearing Walter speak so passionately made him question his rigid stance. "I still worry about bites," But if your group tames them, it's better than seeing them roam or get shot. The donation might not shift Townsend into a fervent supporter, but it symbolized bridging the gap between fear and acceptance. During one feeding session, Sargent allowed Rosa to gently slip a loose leash around its neck. Startled, it pulled away, but she quickly reassured it, releasing tension. Walter stood back, anxious, while the dog panted, uncertain if this was a trap. Over minutes, it calmed enough that Rosa walked a half-step with it. Then it got spooked, twisting free. Though not fully success, it was a leap forward. Sargent had let her attach a leash, if only briefly. The volunteer trainer decided they'd try again soon, maybe with sedation if truly necessary, but everyone hoped trust alone might suffice. Walter left that night with a renewed sense of hope. If they managed to bring Sargent in for medical checks, the pilot's biggest challenge, rehabilitating the most intimidating dog, would become its greatest triumph. But each day, critics still hovered, ready to pounce if any slip occurred. The pilot remained under a magnifying glass. As the final city council review approached, all eyes were on whether Sargent would join the shelter or continue evading capture. The tension set the stage for a culminating drama where fear, empathy, and an old soldier's unwavering commitment could finally converge in a moment that might bring both tears of relief and a city's genuine transformation. Time was running short before the pilot's official 6-month review, where the city council would either confirm it as a permanent fixture or disband it for a more definitive solution. Rosa worked tirelessly to finalize records of how many dogs had been rehomed, the cost savings from volunteer labor, and proof of reduced stray sightings. Meanwhile, Walter found himself longing for the day Sargent would let them bring him safely to the shelter. That would symbolize the ultimate redemption of this program. Councilman Fitzpatrick, while somewhat tempered by prior successes, still saw the big, unrescued dog as Exhibit A of the pilot's incompleteness. In interviews, he repeated that if the project couldn't secure the most aggressive stray E, it was flawed. A few incidents of minor scuffles, dogs rummaging through trash or barking late at night, rekindled public nerves. Some older residents, while supportive of Walter, dreaded that any day a child might get injured. Rosa recognized they had to show definitive progress with Sargent. The volunteer trainer, a patient woman named Linda, proposed a slow lure tactic, leaving a specially built dog crate at Sargent's usual feeding spot, draping it with a comforting item. If Sargent grew familiar with it, they might coax him inside with a treat, then gently close it. Walter, though anxious, agreed to try. The plan risked losing any trust if the dog felt tricked, but Linda argued it was the safest route. One late afternoon, Linda, Rosa, and a small crew set up the crate near the old rail yard. They placed a blanket inside, one that smelled of Rosa's presence, and high-value treats. Then they stationed themselves at a distance. Walter, using binoculars from a vantage behind a fence, watched. Hours crawled by as the sun dipped behind the horizon. Sargent emerged from the shadows, sniffed the air, recognized the usual feeding arrangement. He approached warily, inch by inch. Walter held his breath. If this dog walked in, it might all end swiftly. Sargent circled the crate, stepping around it. Each volunteer stifled any sudden move. For a moment, it poked its head near the entrance, nose twitching. Tension spiked among watchers. But Sargent backed away, eyes scanning for anything suspicious. A minute or two passed, feeling like an eternity. Then, with tail half lowered, the dog left the area, receding into the gloom. Disappointment weighed heavily. Linda reminded them that it was progress. The dog didn't bolt in panic, it simply declined to enter. "We'll keep at it," she said, determined. Walter returned home that night, exhaustion mingling with heartbreak. He recognized how close yet far they were. The entire pilot's narrative hinged on turning a menacing stray into a rehabilitated success, ideally adopting it out or, at minimum, ensuring it wasn't prowling the streets. His mind reeled with questions. Did the city truly expect them to solve every stray in 6 months? Could they ask for more time? Or would one dog's refusal to be captured overshadow all the pilot's accomplishments? Sensing Walter's discouragement, Rosa paid him a visit. She brought new photos of recently adopted dogs, families smiling, children hugging their furry new companions. "Look at these victories," she reminded him. "Sergeant is only one piece of the puzzle. We've done so much good." Walter nodded, but frustration lingered. He expressed a fear that if Sergeant never accepted captivity, the city might forcibly hunt him down. Rosa gently assured him they'd keep trying, day after day, offering him a final chance to trust. "We won't give up until the city forces us," she vowed. Meanwhile, Fitzpatrick announced that at the upcoming council review, he planned to demand evidence Sergeant was no longer at large. If not, he'd push for a motion enabling professional trappers with euthanasia clearance. The volunteer group reeled at this threat. Ms. Alvarez told them not to lose hope, but she admitted council politics could be fickle. If Fitzpatrick convinced enough members that one dangerous dog remained unstoppable, the pilot's budget might be slashed or the entire approach re-evaluated. Amid the stress, a volunteer named Carla discovered she had a friend who specialized in rehabilitating high-fear dogs. That friend, Mark, offered to come for a few days to help specifically with Sergeant. He proposed a quiet stakeout, a milder sedation approach if necessary, and consistent routines to build trust. Rosa jumped at the offer. Mark arrived, scouted the rail yard, and on a quiet midweek evening, began a methodical strategy. He'd station himself near the crate, letting Sergeant get used to his presence. Over multiple nights, he'd gradually shorten the distance. If the dog allowed, Mark might slip sedation into the food to calm Sergeant enough for a gentle crate enclosure. The idea unnerved Walter, but Mark insisted it was humane sedation, not lethal. "We can't let him roam forever if it leads to city retaliation," Mark explained. Walter, reminiscent of wartime missions, recognized this step as akin to going behind enemy lines. But here, the enemy was just a frightened soul. Each day, Mark and Rosa updated him on the dog's reactions. Some nights, Sergeant would creep closer, but balk at the final moment. On others, it devoured the spiked food but remained alert, resisting drowsiness. Mark, though persistent, found it challenging. Still, the dog was warming to their presence. He cautioned Walter that success or failure might come abruptly. Sometimes the dog might sense betrayal and vanish. Time was short, with the final council review only 2 weeks away. One late evening, Walter sat on his porch, gazing at the stars, wrestling with both hope and dread. He clutched a small photo of a stray dog from the shelter that day, newly adopted. So many had found homes. He pictured Sergeant among them, lying calmly at the feet of a gentle adopter. The mental image nearly brought him to tears, an old soldier dreaming of a once feral dog's redemption. He prayed that the final push to rescue Sergeant wouldn't betray the dog's fragile trust. The old man realized this might be his last great mission, saving the very creature that once made him fear for his life. Thus, the tension soared. The looming city council date, Fitzpatrick's ultimatum, and the precarious slow dance with Sergeant converged into a crucial test. Could the volunteer group deliver a full redemption story, or would an outlier dog sabotage their victory? The next few days promised an emotional crescendo that would decide the fate of both Sergeant and the pilot, perhaps even forging or fracturing the community's newfound unity under the banner of compassion. With mere days until the council's final review, tension permeated Briarwood like a coiled spring. Rosa's volunteer group felt the weight of expectations. If they didn't demonstrate capturing and rehabilitating Sergeant, Fitzpatrick could rally enough votes to revoke the pilot. Meanwhile, Mark, the visiting dog rehabilitator, stepped up his efforts each evening, determined to gain Sergeant's confidence enough to guide him into a crate or gently sedate him without destroying trust. On a crisp evening, Mark and Rosa began their usual stakeout near the rail yard. They set out the padded crate lined with a familiar blanket and fresh, appetizing food. Walter, though not physically present, waited anxiously at home for news. As Mark settled quietly, Sergeant emerged, tail low, scanning for traps. Mark read its body language, less frantic tension, some curiosity. He ventured a small sedation dose in the dog's meal, hoping it would relax the edge of fear. The plan: if Sergeant grew calm enough, Mark might slip a leash over it or coax it into the open crate. The dog ate, stepping closer to Mark than ever. The sedation took mild effect, not forcing the dog to collapse, but reducing its flighty wariness. Step by careful step, Mark extended a gentle slip lead. Sergeant tensed but didn't flee, ears flicking uncertainly. Rosa's heart pounded, watching from behind. With infinite patience, Mark inched forward, softly speaking. "It's okay, big boy." Sergeant let out a low whine, but didn't retreat. Another bite of food, a twitch of the slip lid, and success. The loop slid over the dog's head. Sergeant stiffened, letting out a quiet growl that signaled a test. Mark stayed calm, no sudden yanks. The sedation suppressed the dog's reflex to bolt. Gently, Mark guided Sergeant a few steps, praising softly. Rosa stifled a squeal of excitement. Within minutes, Mark led Sergeant near the crate's threshold. The dog's muzzle parted slightly, uncertain. He attempted a step backward. Mark paused, no pressure. Then, Sergeant advanced again, sniffing the crate's interior. With a final coax, it went in. Swiftly, Mark closed the crate door. Sergeant tensed, but Mark reassured it with a calm voice. The dog whined, pawing at the gate, but didn't thrash violently. Rosa covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. They had done it. They had Sergeant, safe and contained, without traumatizing force. Mark signaled success, calling for an immediate transport van from the pilot group. Half in disbelief, they carefully loaded the crate. The dog, subdued by sedation, complied with minimal struggle. Over a speakerphone, they told Walter, who erupted in relieved laughter cry. "Praise the Lord," he muttered, tears streaming. The final piece was set. At the temporary shelter, volunteers prepared a quiet kennel with soft bedding, avoiding bright lights or loud noises. The sedation wore off as Sergeant arrived, but the dog, though anxious, only half-heartedly tested the kennel bars. Linda, the volunteer trainer, softly praised him, providing water. Everyone marveled at the calmness. Even Ms. Alvarez arrived to see Sergeant with her own eyes. She patted Walter's shoulder. "The city has been waiting for this. Congratulations." Fitzpatrick, alerted to the news, showed up the next morning, suspicious. "What if it's just docile from drugs?" he asked. Linda explained they'd used minimal sedation. The real test, she said, was to see if the dog could adapt in captivity without lashing out. Over the next few days, trainers gently worked with Sergeant, feeding him by hand, letting him sniff a quiet environment. Walter visited with Rosa, each time standing near the kennel, speaking softly. The dog recognized him, not snarling but scanning. If it felt cornered, it would back away, but it no longer threatened aggressively. With Sergeant now in the shelter, Miss Alvarez compiled the pilot's results for the final council session. Over 80 strays captured, 40 adopted, 30 fosters in progress, minimal cost overruns, and crucially, the once most dangerous dog secured without harm. Walter, though quietly optimistic, braced for one last wave of negativity. The day of the review, the council chamber brimmed with volunteers wearing bright green t-shirts labeled Briarwood Rescue. Fitzpatrick's camp was smaller, less vocal this time, lacking the fear narrative they once carried. Miss Alvarez presented the stats, a success by every measure. She invited Mark, the rehabilitator, to share how they humanely captured Sergeant. Applause rose. Fitzpatrick tried objecting that the pilot took too long to catch one dog, but found the momentum of positivity unstoppable. The mayor then opened the floor for any final arguments. None emerged, except a few proud statements from fosters who described how dogs had enriched their families. Called up to speak briefly, Walter thanked the city for trusting compassion. He recounted how Sergeant's safe capture sealed his own healing from that night's terror. The crowd listened intently. "I never thought my twilight years would revolve around saving stray dogs," he quipped, a soft chuckle rippling through the audience. "But maybe that's the best legacy, turning fear into love, even at 90. Ms. Alvarez then introduced the official motion to ratify the pilot as a permanent city program, the Briarwood Animal Rescue Initiative. A quick roll call vote found unanimous yes. Cheers and a standing ovation filled the chamber. Exiting City Hall, volunteers wept happily, hugging each other. Rosa, exhausted but triumphant, collapsed into Walter's arms, whispering, "We did it." Ms. Alvarez approached with a handshake for them both. Even Fitzpatrick offered a stiff nod, muttering, "The results speak for themselves." And he left quietly, perhaps acknowledging a lost battle. The synergy in the group soared, culminating in a spontaneous plan to gather at the shelter for a small celebration. That evening, in that humble building, volunteers, fosters, and newly minted staffers toasted the victory with lemonade and homemade cookies. People circled around Sergeant's kennel, seeing him rest calmly. Linda allowed Walter to open the kennel gate slowly. The dog stepped out, sniffed Walter's outstretched hand. Everyone watched with emotional intensity as Sergeant quietly nuzzled Walter's palm. No aggression, no flight. The old soldier's eyes brimmed with tears. The circle parted in hushed awe, feeling the resonance of that moment. From savage confrontation to gentle acceptance. Indeed, tears of joy welled in multiple eyes. Walter lowered himself to a stool, letting Sergeant lean against him. "That's what you needed all along, huh, boy? Just someone to show you you're not alone," Walter murmured. The dog gazed up, responding with a trusting stillness. The entire pilot's essence crystallized in that scene, bridging hostility and heartbreak with patient compassion. In Walter's tearful glance, one saw a reflection of the battles he'd fought overseas and the more personal war he'd waged at home against fear, both his own and the dog's. With official endorsement from the city, the rescue approach was no longer a trial, but a community hallmark. The new unity that blossomed, man and dog, city council and volunteers, gave birth to a brighter vision for Briarwood's future. In the hush of that moment, Walter felt an overwhelming sense of peace. If he had done nothing else in his final years, he had helped show that empathy conquers fear, forging ties where once there was nothing but threat. The tears glistening on his cheeks were testament to that truth. The transformation of Briarwood's relationship with stray dogs stood as a victory for empathy. But the most poignant culmination arrived in the weeks following the city's final approval of the rescue program. In that period, the newly built shelter facility thrived with volunteer teams, fosters, and ongoing adoptions. Families visited on weekends, choosing once maligned strays to bring into their homes. The wariness that once cloaked many streets at dusk gave way to a gentle acceptance of a problem that was now under humane control. While multiple success stories unfolded, the most emblematic one came from Sergeant, the formidable dog that had nearly attacked Walter. Slowly, day after day, under the gentle care of the shelter staff and volunteers, Sergeant evolved from a tense, aloof presence to a calmer soul. He allowed leashes and short training sessions. Children observed from behind safe fences, awed by how a dog rumored to be vicious could walk politely next to a volunteer, accepting treats with careful gentleness. One afternoon, in front of a small audience that included Ms. Alvarez, Rosa, and a cluster of fosters, the trainer decided Sergeant was ready for a short stroll outside the facility's yard. Walter, hearing the news, insisted on being there. Leaning on his cane, he watched as they carefully opened the kennel, latched a leash to Sergeant's collar, and guided him out. The dog hesitated a beat, scanning the crowd, then recognized Walter among them. A wave of hush overtook the watchers. Sergeant let out a single bark, not of threat but excitement. Wagging his tail, he approached Walter, pressing his muzzle to the old man's hand. For Walter, that moment was the emotional apex of this entire odyssey. The dog that once pinned him with snarls now willingly sought his closeness. Overwhelmed, Walter knelt as best he could, tears slipping down his cheeks. Sergeant licked his palm softly. Rosa stepped forward, tears in her own eyes, resting a hand on Walter's shoulder. This truly was the script's grand finale of redemption. Hostility had bloomed into trust, bridging age, species, and a terrifying past. Onlookers wept openly, clapping in subdued wonder. This was the living proof that no creature is beyond saving if someone cares enough to try. In that scene, It became clear Sergeant no longer needed the constant watchfulness of the shelter. The staff realized he might find a permanent home. Many wondered who could handle such a big dog. Then quietly, Walter murmured he would adopt Sergeant himself. Gasps rippled. He was 90, living alone. But Rosa and Miss Alvarez found the idea beautiful. "If that's your wish, we'll help arrange visits. Ensure you're not alone in caring for him," Mrs. Alvarez said. Volunteers pledged to assist with daily walks, errands, vet checks. Walter, tears still shining, responded simply, "He saved me from my own fear. I'd be honored to give him a home." Some worried about the practicality, but the wave of support overcame concerns. The official adoption paperwork was drawn up, forging a final bond between the old soldier and the once feared dog. That day, in a modest signing ceremony at the shelter, Walter and Sergeant together sealed a story that started under a lamppost in terror and ended in a promise of loyalty. Applause and tears abounded, each volunteer feeling an epic sense of closure. Beyond that climactic adoption, the rescue program thrived. Ms. Alvarez championed expansions with neighboring towns, forging a regional approach. The pilot became permanent, titled the Briarwood Humane Alliance. Over time, the city's stray population declined to manageable levels, with new dogs quickly guided into the cycle of spay-neuter and adoption. Fitzpatrick, though not a convert, admitted the outcomes exceeded his earlier pessimism. Walter's house, once silent, now resonated with Sergeant's footsteps. The dog, forging an almost intuitive bond, rarely left Walter's side. A few neighbors marveled, peeking over fences to see if that was truly the huge stray that once roamed the train tracks. They found a calm dog napping by Walter's rocking chair. Meanwhile, Walter's sense of purpose soared. He wrote a short letter to an old military comrade. They called it a pilot project, but for me it was a final assignment. I'm proud to have served again, in a war of compassion. As months went by, families new to Briarwood heard the story of the old vet who turned the scariest dog into a companion. The city's identity shifted, from one overshadowed by stray problems to a shining example of community-driven solutions. The local newspaper ran follow-up pieces. A year after the pilot, "How are we doing?" They featured photos of the once-cornered Walter now strolling with Sergeant, greeting children on the sidewalk. The fear that once gripped hearts had given way to friendly waves and scattered giggles, as kids recognized that big dog with the wagging tail. In the privacy of his living room, next to war medals and battered photo albums, Walter occasionally gazed at Sergeant dozing on a rug, the dog's breathing calm and rhythmic. He'd recall that night, the low growls, the swirling dread, then realize how it all led here, bridging an unlikely friendship. The tears that glistened in Walter's eyes those days were neither from fear nor sorrow, but from gratitude at how life can still surprise us. He, at 90, had formed one last bond that truly mattered, reminding him that love and redemption are not confined by age or circumstance. On a warm afternoon, the mayor invited Walter to speak at a small civic event celebrating the pilot's official success. Smiling, Walter stepped forward, Sergeant calmly at his side, and said simply, "I learned you're never too old to open your heart, and a dog is never too lost to come home." The applause thundered. In that final note, the moral of their journey crystallized. Where fear once ruled, empathy built a stronger path. Thus ended the story that began with a circle of snarling dogs around a vulnerable old man. Through a tapestry of heartfelt activism and personal conviction, the man who could have died in that moment ended up forging a new life for himself and the dog who nearly became his undoing. The tears that once symbolized terror now signified relief and astonishment at the power of second chances. Briarwood's stray crisis had not just been solved, it had been transformed into a living testament that hope can flower even in the darkest corners, uniting hearts that once cowered apart. Thank you for journeying through this moving tale of survival, empathy, and unlikely friendship between a 90-year-old veteran and a once-feared pack of stray dogs. If Walter's story inspired or touched you, please subscribe to our channel for more deeply emotional storytelling. Feel free to share this video with friends or family who believe in the transformative power of compassion. Let's continue celebrating the bonds that bring us together, one rescued life at a time. Stay with us for our next story of courage, hope, and the unexpected miracles that await those brave enough to care.